The scene at the airport was all too familiar, private jets parked near the terminal passengers, quickly passing through security and heading to the VIP lounge. A tranquil, upscale space where executives, investors, and celebrities often pass through. But for one woman standing in line, everything felt off. This was not the experience she was used to. She was dressed in a soft, blush-colored suit, elegant yet simple without the usual flashy accessories. No designer bags or jewels. Just a pair of black heels and an aura of quiet confidence that couldn't be concealed. She made her way to the VIP check-in desk where the staff was handling other guests. Everything seemed normal until one of the attendants looked her up and down, her gaze dripping with disdain. "Sorry, this line is for executives only," the staff member said, her voice flat and indifferent. The words landed with a sharpness that wasn't just about being dismissive, it was a clear form of discrimination. This woman didn't fit the expected image, so she didn't belong in the executive line. No entourage, no flashy attire, just her on her own, but that should have been enough. The words were like a slap in the face, but they weren't new. The feeling of being looked down upon, dismissed because of how she appeared, was something she'd experienced time and time again. From when she was younger to now, as the CEO of a major company, nothing had really changed. She stood there composed, not rushing to react or raise her voice. The attendant's eyes scanned her up and down, still waiting for a response. The moment was loaded with tension, but the woman simply held her ground. She wasn't about to let this incident slide, not today. Slowly, without a word, she reached into her bag and pulled out her first-class boarding pass. She placed it on the counter, followed by her business card, which had her name printed clearly on it, CEO of a multi-billion-dollar company. Beside that, a personal touch, her private jet flight details. She didn't need to explain. She didn't need to justify. The truth was right there in front of them. She owned that plane parked outside. And in that moment, it was clear her power didn't need to be announced. It was simply undeniable. The attendant hesitated, her cold demeanor faltering for a moment, but she didn't back down. Instead, she continued with her task, her attitude unchanged. However, around them, other passengers and staff began to notice the exchange. The tension in the air started to shift, and with every second, the sense of injustice grew stronger. But the woman, composed and unflinching, didn't rush to demand an apology or make a scene. She knew this wasn't the time. This moment would unfold on her terms, not theirs. And for now, she simply stood there, silently challenging the assumption that she didn't belong. The tension hung in the air like a heavy mist, but she remained calm, unfazed. The staff member behind the counter, still skeptical, hesitated for a moment as she stared at the boarding pass and business card the woman had placed before her. She raised an eyebrow, perhaps, thinking it was all a mistake, but still didn't show any signs of backing down. The woman who stood poised and unflinching had already anticipated this reaction. She'd encountered this behavior too many times before, and though it was always painful, it was nothing new. She didn't need to prove herself to anyone, but sometimes she found herself in situations like this, moments where the world tested her simply because of her appearance. Her calmness was an armor she wore daily, one that didn't need to shout its power, but allowed her to command respect through actions alone. The more the staff hesitated, the more her presence seemed to fill the space around her like an invisible force that pushed the boundaries of the room. She wasn't just a CEO of a billion-dollar company. She had built it, fought for it, and faced obstacles far greater than this in her life. She would not be overlooked, not here, not today. Without uttering another word, she stepped back slightly, her heels clicking softly against the marble floor as she moved to the side. There was a brief pause, a beat in time, and then, like the closing of a door that cannot be opened again, the private jet she owned arrived. Her assistant had activated the protocol, and now it was time for the next step. The jet, sleek and immaculate, touched down on the tarmac near the terminal, its massive engines humming softly as it rolled to a stop. It was parked not far from where she stood, almost too close for comfort, just enough for everyone to see. It wasn't subtle. It wasn't meant to be. The moment was designed to show her true power, the power to move beyond the usual boundaries and constraints the world tried to place on her. She stood still, composed, and without a glance toward her plane. In the background, the sound of the jet's engines fading out seemed to make everything else seem quieter. The world around her was beginning to shift. Around her, passengers who had been waiting and watching started whispering to one another, their curiosity piqued. The tension in the air grew heavier, more palpable. They could sense something monumental was unfolding, even if they didn't fully understand it yet. The airport staff, still processing the unexpected turn of events, were left stammering. The woman didn't need to explain herself further, she didn't need to argue. The proof was sitting right outside, just beyond the windows, and it was undeniable. She had arrived on her own terms. As the staff continued to mumble among themselves, uncertain of what to do next, a few of the passengers who had been nearby took out their phones. Quietly, they started recording, capturing every second of this unfolding moment. The tension between the woman and the staff was palpable, and the idea of her standing her ground, silent yet commanding, was beginning to resonate. In her mind, she wasn't concerned with the small-mindedness of the staff or their disbelief. Her thoughts flashed back to a time years ago when she was just starting out, when people would question her every move, doubting her potential. Back then, she would try to prove herself, to fight tooth and nail to show them she belonged. But now she had learned that she didn't need to prove anything. The world would eventually see her for who she truly was, no matter how long it took. And so she waited. The seconds ticked by, but she didn't feel the need to rush. There was no reason to engage in a battle she had already won. She was already where she belonged. She had earned this moment. As the staff realized what was happening, the realization spread like wildfire. They were now the ones who had to adjust. Not her. She had arrived. She owned this moment. And in that moment, everything began to shift. The murmurs grew louder. More people turned their attention to her. The silent confidence she exuded was enough to make even the most dismissive observer second-guess their assumption. And then the woman finally spoke, her voice calm but carrying an undeniable authority. "I believe we're done here." The words were soft, yet they echoed through the room. The staff, still processing the shift in power, remained silent. And as the woman turned to walk toward the door that would lead her to the jet, it was clear that the world, at least for a few moments, had finally caught up to her. The woman's steps toward the door of the terminal were deliberate, but the tension in the air had only intensified. Staff members exchanged nervous glances, unsure of how to proceed. The sound of her heels echoed in the otherwise silent space, each click a reminder that she was still there, standing firm and unshaken. But the room had shifted. There was a new unease among the staff, a subtle realization that their initial judgment might have been far off. The attendant who had initially dismissed her now fumbled with her tablet, her fingers tapping nervously across the screen. She couldn't seem to find the right information, the flight manifest or confirmation details she had earlier requested. Something was wrong, and the unease in her eyes was becoming more apparent with each passing second. "Excuse me, miss," one of the other staff members stammered, walking toward her. "Can I help you with anything?" She turned slowly, her eyes meeting his with a calm intensity that seemed to pierce right through him. She didn't respond immediately. Instead, she looked at him for a long moment, the silence thick and palpable. "No, thank you," she said softly, but the words were heavy with meaning. She didn't need help. What she needed was respect. What she needed was for the situation to be recognized for what it was. But just as the staff seemed to be at a loss, a new figure appeared in the scene. A man in a suit, impeccably dressed, walked briskly through the crowd. His presence commanded attention immediately. He had the look of someone who was used to being taken seriously. He approached the desk with an air of authority, and his eyes briefly flicked toward her, toward the woman who had been treated so dismissively only moments before. "I believe this is a mistake," he said, his voice carrying enough weight that the entire room seemed to quiet. His eyes met hers with a small, knowing smile, as if he too had been waiting for this moment. He was an executive at the airline, and he knew who she was. He had seen her name pop up on the flight manifest. His gaze moved toward the staff, who were still fumbling with their devices, clearly uncomfortable with the growing pressure. "This is the CEO of Summit Enterprises," the man continued, speaking to the staff but keeping his eyes on her. "I'll be handling this from here." The moment he spoke, the tension in the air seemed to shift again. The staff froze and the room fell into an uneasy silence. The woman didn't need to introduce herself. Her reputation had preceded her. She had earned her place long before she walked through those doors. The staff members looked around, unable to process what was happening. The man's words were a final, undeniable confirmation of who she was, but it didn't matter now. The damage had been done. She could see it in their eyes, the regret, the fear of their own mistake. The moment had passed, but the stain of it would linger. They had underestimated her. They had misjudged her. And now there was no going back. For a moment, the woman stood silently watching as the man continued to speak with the staff, clearly resolving the situation. The discomfort in the room was palpable, and she could sense the silent shift of power. This wasn't a confrontation she needed to engage in anymore. Her presence alone had made the point. With one last look at the staff, she turned to leave, her gaze now focused on the terminal doors ahead. As she walked, the sounds of whispers and murmurs surrounded her. But none of it mattered. She had already won. The moment they tried to push her aside was the moment she had silently claimed her place. As she stepped onto the tarmac and made her way toward her waiting jet, she felt a sense of calm wash over her. She didn't need to raise her voice or make a grand gesture. She had made her presence felt. The world, at least for now, had been reminded of who she was, and that was all she needed. In the distance, the hum of the jet engines grew louder, the sound of her power and resolve. The moment she stepped out of the terminal and into the sunlight, she felt the weight of the world shift. Her footsteps were steady, purposeful as she walked towards her private jet. The hum of the engines grew louder, a constant reminder of the power she had quietly wielded. She didn't need to look back at the staff or the onlookers. She knew what had just unfolded. But she could still feel the eyes on her, the whispers in the air. Behind her, the scene in the terminal was unraveling, but in the midst of the murmurs and nervous chatter, one voice rose above the rest. I saw her name in the system. A young woman's voice broke through the silence. It was Elena, the young concierge who had been standing at her desk when the whole thing started. The staff had dismissed her. At first, her opinion was secondary, her status as a junior employee too insignificant to matter in the grand scheme of things. But Elena had noticed something that the others hadn't. She had seen the woman's name in the booking system earlier that day. She knew exactly who she was. As Elena spoke, her words slowly started to gather attention like a spark igniting a fire. The room, still in a quiet state of chaos, grew more focused on the fact that someone had witnessed the truth from the beginning. The staff had brushed it off, but Elena had been paying attention. She's the one from the flight manifest, Elena said, her voice growing stronger with each syllable. The other staff members turned toward her, suddenly unsure of what to do. Elena wasn't just a bystander anymore. She was the one who had seen what was happening and had chosen to speak up. The manager, Gregory, looked furious. His face flushed with embarrassment, and his hands trembled slightly as he clenched them into fists. He had tried to cover up the situation, tried to downplay it, but now the truth was coming to light, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. "You're wrong," Gregory snapped, trying to regain control. But his voice lacked the usual authority. "She doesn't belong here." Elena shook her head, not backing down. "No, I'm not wrong. I saw her name, and she was right to be here." A few other staff members, those who had been standing in the background, began to murmur in agreement. They had seen the woman's boarding pass, too. They had seen the name on the flight manifest. They knew who she was. The realization spread quickly, rippling through the staff and the nearby passengers. What had started as an isolated incident of ignorance was now turning into a collective recognition of the mistake they had made. The woman wasn't just any guest. She was the CEO of Summit Enterprises, a company that had transformed industries. She was no ordinary passenger. She was someone who deserved respect, someone who had earned her place in this world. But it wasn't just the staff who had begun to understand. A few passengers who had been quietly observing from the sidelines started to speak up as well. One man who had been sitting near the gate stood up from his chair and made his way toward the front desk. His voice was firm as he addressed the staff. "She's right," he said, nodding toward Elena. "I've seen her name on the flight manifest. You've made a huge mistake." The murmurs around the room grew louder. The atmosphere had shifted from one of tension to one of collective acknowledgement. The woman's quiet confidence, her ability to remain composed under pressure, was no longer just something the staff could ignore. The world around them had seen her stand tall. And now they were finally beginning to see her for who she truly was. Elena's heart raced as she spoke, but her words were clear and resolute. "She's not a fraud. She's the real deal. And you all should be ashamed of how you treated her." The manager, Gregory, stood silent, his face pale, his reputation now in tatters. He had tried to belittle this woman, tried to dismiss her with an attitude of superiority. But now, as Elena's words echoed through the room, he could feel the weight of his own actions pressing down on him. The power dynamics had shifted. He was no longer in control. The passengers around them began to watch more closely, some even pulling out their phones to record the moment. The quiet dignity of the woman who had been humiliated in front of everyone was now a symbol of defiance, and they were witnessing her reclaim her power. The manager's futile attempts to control the narrative were no match for the truth that was unfolding before them. As Elena spoke the truth, she could see it in the eyes of the other passengers, the shift in their perspective, the realization that they had witnessed something much bigger than a simple case of mistaken identity. They had witnessed a moment of power, of justice, and of self-respect. The atmosphere in the terminal was thick with tension, but it was the kind of tension that had shifted, moved, and now settled into a quiet storm. The woman still standing at the center of it all felt it too. The whispers of passengers, the stammering of the staff, the realization that what had just unfolded could not be undone. They had crossed a line, and now as the minutes ticked by, there was no going back. She could hear the faint murmur of voices growing louder, more certain, as Elena's words continued to echo in the background. She's not a fraud. She's the real deal. The sound of those words, spoken with conviction, had done what the woman's silence could not. It had cracked the illusion of control that the staff had held on to. But it wasn't enough. Not yet. The manager Gregory was visibly shaken. His face, still flushed with embarrassment, was now pale. His hands were clenched into fists at his sides, but there was no anger in them. Only a growing sense of fear, the fear of being exposed. His authority was crumbling before his eyes, and he knew it. His entire demeanor had shifted from arrogance to desperation. "We need to handle this properly," Gregory muttered, his voice strained. "Security is on the way, and this is going to be resolved." He spoke as if security could somehow erase the truth, as if they could somehow undo the damage that had already been done. But the woman knew that nothing, no amount of apologies or authority could cover up the stain of their actions. They had humiliated her, tried to push her aside, and it wasn't something that could be swept under the rug. She could feel the weight of the past behind her, the memories of every time she'd been dismissed or overlooked simply because of her appearance. But this time was different. This time she would not be made small. She turned slowly, her gaze now focused entirely on Gregory, her voice low but steady. "You think calling security will solve this?" Her words hung in the air, sharp and controlled. "You think you can intimidate me just like that? It won't work. You've already made your choice." Gregory's eyes flickered with uncertainty. The walls were closing in on him, and he knew it. But he wasn't ready to concede just yet. Just let me handle this," he insisted, his words losing their firmness as he spoke. His eyes darted nervously between Elena and the woman. The truth was out there now, and the whole room knew it. But the woman wasn't done. She wasn't about to let Gregory's feeble attempt at recovery go unanswered. You see, she began, her voice steady as she took a step closer to him. "I don't need your help. I didn't need you to validate my place here. And I certainly don't need your security to come and sweep this under the rug. What you need to understand is that I've been where you are. I know what it feels like to be underestimated, to be told you don't belong." She paused, her gaze locking onto his. "But unlike you, I don't run from my mistakes. And I don't hide behind people to fix what I've broken." Her words cut through him, and for the first time, Gregory hesitated. He had made a mistake, and it was one he couldn't easily erase. At that moment, one of the staff members, a younger man who had been standing off to the side, took a step forward. His face was pale, but his eyes were determined. "She's right," he said, his voice shaky but gaining strength. "I saw her name on the system, too. We should have recognized who she was from the start. This whole thing, it's wrong." The woman turned to him, a flicker of appreciation in her eyes. She had not expected him to speak out, but his words added to the growing momentum of truth in the room. His honesty was the final piece, the confirmation she needed. The walls that had held up the lie began to crack. Gregory's face twisted in frustration. He opened his mouth to argue, but no words came out. He was beaten not physically, but mentally. The truth had caught up with him. His facade of authority was crumbling, and there was nothing he could do to salvage it. The woman turned back toward the door, not giving him the satisfaction of watching her react further. She wasn't here to settle old scores or to make them feel small. She was here to remind them of something far more powerful, that no one, not even them, had the right to define her. The jet outside, the very symbol of her success, was still there, waiting. She didn't need to make a dramatic exit. She didn't need to speak another word. Her silence, her composure, her very presence had already spoken volumes. As she reached the door, she heard the sound of footsteps behind her, a soft but deliberate echo. It was Elena stepping forward with newfound resolve. "You did the right thing," the young woman said quietly. The woman smiled, but it wasn't for Elena. It was for herself. She had shown them all. She had shown them who she was. The door closed behind her as she stepped into the sunlight, and the sound of the plane's engines roared to life. The moment had passed, but its impact would be felt long after she was gone. The door to the terminal slid shut behind her, cutting off the distant echoes of the chaos she had just left behind. Outside, the sun gleamed brightly, but the air was cooler, charged with an energy that felt almost electric. The woman stood for a moment, letting the cool breeze wash over her, collecting herself before stepping toward her waiting jet. It wasn't just the smooth surface of the tarmac she was walking on, it was the culmination of every battle she'd fought, every insult she'd endured, and every moment when others had tried to make her feel small. As she neared the jet, her assistant Carla appeared from the side. Carla had been monitoring the situation from the moment the protocol had been activated. And though the woman could feel the weight of the incident still pressing on her, Carla's presence was a comfort. It was the reassurance that everything was now under control. "Everything's in place," Carla said quietly, her voice steady, though her eyes briefly flickered to the terminal where the staff had once so confidently undermined her. "The system's locked down. We've escalated to corporate. You're clear." The woman nodded her eyes, scanning the runway as the plane's engines revved, preparing for takeoff. She didn't need to check the details. Carla had it all covered. The protocol was simple. No one could escape the truth once the system had been activated. As the woman climbed the steps to the jet, she could feel the weight of what had just happened settle over her. This wasn't just about a mistake at an airport. This was about a system, an institution, and the assumptions that had led people to believe they could treat her however they wished. She had faced similar moments before when she first started out, when she was underestimated, when people couldn't see past her gender or her skin color. But today it was different. Today, she had not raised her voice. She had raised the standard. The jet's door closed behind her with a soft hiss, and the woman took her seat in the plush interior. She didn't waste time dwelling on the airport drama. Her focus was now entirely on the future. The same future she had fought so hard to carve out for herself. The same future that now stretched ahead of her unfazed and unbroken. Meanwhile, back in the terminal, the aftermath of her departure was unfolding in real time. The once skeptical staff members, now fully aware of their mistake, were left scrambling. Gregory, the manager, had been summoned to the back office along with several other employees. The damage had been done, and their fate was now in the hands of corporate. No amount of excuses or apologies would undo the humiliation they had inflicted on the woman earlier. But as the woman's jet began to taxi down the runway, she didn't care about them. She had learned long ago that her worth wasn't measured by the people who doubted her, or the systems that tried to contain her. It wasn't measured by the opinions of those who dismissed her potential. No, her worth was defined by the choices she made, the ground she stood on, and the power she carried silently within her. Carla walked into the cabin, her presence as calm and professional as always. She didn't need to say anything. They had been through this before, the high-stakes moments where everything hinged on doing the right thing without the need for recognition or applause. It wasn't the first time they'd had to move quickly, and it wouldn't be the last. But today there was a certain satisfaction in knowing they had already won. "We're good to go," Carla confirmed, her voice clipped but confident. The woman gave a small smile, nodding. "Take off. Let's get home." As the jet lifted off the ground, the horizon expanding before them, she could already feel the calm of the moment settling in. The world below seemed smaller now, distant. For a few minutes, she allowed herself to simply breathe, letting go of the weight of the day. It wasn't just about winning in the moment. It was about reminding herself and everyone else that she was not to be underestimated, not ever again. The plane soared higher, the city below, shrinking away into a distant memory, and for a brief moment she could feel the weight of the journey lift off her shoulders. She was heading home, but more than that, she was heading forward toward whatever came next. And that in itself was enough. The hum of the jet engines beneath her was a familiar, comforting sound. The woman settled deeper into her seat, her mind drifting toward the horizon. The incident at the airport was behind her now, but there was something about the stillness of the moment that made it feel as though the events were still unfolding in the background, like the remnants of a storm slowly dissipating. She had faced challenges before, times when others tried to diminish her, belittle her, or push her into a corner. She had learned early in her career that when you build something from nothing, when you carve your place in a world that constantly tells you you're not enough, the only way to rise above it is to stand tall and let your work speak for itself. Words, no matter how cutting, were always fleeting. But actions defined who you were. Her phone buzzed, interrupting her thoughts. It was a text message from Carla. Corporate just reached out. They've already pulled the recordings. The staff are being questioned now. It's over. A sense of satisfaction, quiet but profound, settled over her. The system she had quietly set into motion was doing exactly what it was supposed to. The truth was now inescapable, and those who had once doubted her, those who had belittled her, were left to answer for their actions. But it wasn't the feeling of victory that gave her peace. It was the knowledge that the system was finally working as it should, with accountability, transparency, and fairness. The jet climbed higher, cutting through the clouds, and her thoughts turned to the future. She had spent years building Summit Enterprises from the ground up, years spent overcoming obstacles, proving herself, and pushing against every barrier thrown in her way. But this was more than just a personal victory. It was a symbolic moment of reckoning not just for her, but for the systems that allowed discrimination and bias to fester unchecked. Her phone buzzed again, this time a call from the airline's executive board. She accepted her voice, calm but firm. "Hello, Miss Clark," the voice on the other end said, clearly attempting to maintain a professional tone, though there was a hint of nervousness. "We just wanted to reach out personally to apologize for the incident earlier. We've reviewed the footage and statements, and we are taking immediate action." She leaned back in her seat, the weight of their words not impressing her. She had already known they'd respond. After all, they had no choice. The truth was in the recordings and the testimony from passengers and employees alike. The woman had already set the wheel of justice in motion, and now they were scrambling to catch up. "Apology accepted," she said, her tone cool. "But it's not enough. What matters is what comes next. I want to see that the entire staff involved is held accountable, no exceptions." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Of course, Miss Clark," the voice said, finally conceding. "We're already reviewing all personnel files and conducting interviews. Rest assured this will not be overlooked." She could hear the sound of shuffling papers, the nervousness now turning into full-fledged concern on their part. The fact that she was calling the shots even from 3,000 feet in the air was exactly the message she needed to send. "I control this narrative, not you. The issue is systemic," she continued, her voice growing sharper. "This wasn't an isolated incident. It's the culture of exclusion that needs to be addressed. Your staff's behavior today wasn't just a mistake, it's a reflection of how your institution operates. If this doesn't change, you can expect more than just a lawsuit. You'll lose more than just clients." The silence on the other end was deafening. She knew her words were sinking in. "I'll expect a formal action plan by the end of the week," she said, her tone. "No longer one of negotiation, but of finality. And I'll be following up personally." As she hung up, she allowed herself a moment of quiet satisfaction. The phone call had been brief, but it was the final nail in the coffin for the airport staff who had tried to dismiss her earlier. And as much as she enjoyed this quiet victory, she knew that the real work had only just begun. The reality was that people like her, people who fought to climb to the top, would always face these challenges. But now, with the power she had accumulated, she could help shift the tide. Her company, her influence, and her voice would serve as tools for dismantling the biases that had plagued institutions for too long. Her assistant, Carla, appeared in the cabin again, holding a tablet. She handed it to the woman without a word. The tablet displayed an internal memo from Summit Enterprises, one she had requested weeks ago in anticipation of a day like this. It was a proposal for a diversity initiative, one that would not only change the culture within her company, but could potentially set a precedent for others in the industry to follow. The woman glanced over the document, her eyes narrowing as she absorbed the details. This would be the next step, not just to hold others accountable, but to change the game entirely. The plane surged forward, slicing through the clouds, and she smiled. It wasn't just about winning today. It was about creating a future where these battles didn't need to be fought. A future where people were judged for who they were, not what they looked like. And she, for one, would make sure that future was within reach. The jet sliced through the sky as the woman leaned back in her seat, her thoughts still sharp but calm. The events of the day had unfolded quickly, and now that the immediate tension had passed, she allowed herself a moment to reflect. She was no longer simply fighting for herself. This was about something much larger. It was about dismantling the structures that allowed people to be mistreated because of their appearance, their race, their gender, or any of the other labels society too easily applied to them. Her phone buzzed again, pulling her from her thoughts. This time it was an email alert. She opened it, her eyes scanning the subject line, "Incident Report and Action Plan from Horizon Airlines." The attachment was a detailed outline of the airline's response to the incident earlier that day. The woman's eyes narrowed as she began reading. The email was full of apologies, promises of further training, and assurances that proper procedures would be followed moving forward. It was exactly what she had expected, a polished corporate response that hid the true issue. They were addressing the symptoms, not the root cause. With a sigh, she tapped the screen to close the email. She knew that this wasn't going to be enough. What they were proposing was a band-aid, not a solution. She had to push further, push harder. There was no point in giving them the satisfaction of a quick resolution. This wasn't just about holding the employees accountable for their actions. It was about holding the entire institution accountable for the culture that allowed such actions to take place in the first place. She tapped a few commands into her phone, quickly firing off an email of her own to her legal team, her PR department, and a few trusted advisors. The message was brief, direct, and to the point. I want this to go beyond just this incident. I want a complete audit of Horizon Airlines' internal policies, their hiring processes, and their staff training. We cannot let this continue unchecked. She hit send, knowing the message would be acted upon immediately. There was no room for compromise when it came to creating systemic change. As she leaned back in her seat, she allowed herself to smile. It wasn't a smile of satisfaction, but a knowing one. She was in control, and now the power dynamics had shifted completely. This wasn't just an individual confrontation anymore. This was a statement to every corporation, every institution, every person who thought they could discriminate without consequence. Meanwhile, back at Horizon Airlines, things were beginning to unravel. The staff who had once been so confident were now facing the consequences of their actions. Gregory, the manager who had attempted to brush off the incident, was being escorted to the HR department. He was visibly pale, his usual arrogance now replaced with a nervous energy. The other staff members who had been involved in the altercation were also being questioned this time by people who wouldn't let them get away with their actions. The system that had protected them was now the one holding them accountable. Inside the HR office, Gregory sat across from the head of the department, his hands trembling as he tried to explain himself. It was a misunderstanding, he repeated for the third time. We didn't know who she was. We just thought she didn't belong in first class. The HR manager, a middle-aged woman with a no-nonsense attitude, simply stared at him. It's not just about her, Gregory. This is about how we treat every guest regardless of how they look or what they wear. This incident exposed a serious issue in our culture. We've had similar complaints before, and it's clear that something needs to change. Gregory opened his mouth to respond, but the words died on his tongue. He had no excuse. The truth was now out, and there was nothing left to hide behind. He could see it in the HR manager's eyes. His career at Horizon was over. The company's reputation had been damaged, and corporate was already discussing next steps. The airline would have to answer not only to the woman they had wronged, but to their customers, their employees, and the media. Meanwhile, a few miles away, Elena sat at a coffee shop replaying the events in her mind. She hadn't been sure what to expect when she spoke up, but now, as the aftermath unfolded, she realized the impact of what she had done. She hadn't just been a witness to an injustice, she had been part of the change that would ensure it didn't happen again. Her phone buzzed with a new message. It was from the woman, the one who had taught her that silence wasn't always the answer, that sometimes speaking out was the most powerful thing you could do. The message was simple: thank you for speaking up. You did the right thing. Elena smiled, her heart swelling with pride. It wasn't just about standing up for what was right, it was about creating a space where everyone could stand together, speak together, and demand better. The plane cruised smoothly through the sky, but the weight of the world seemed to lift with every mile that passed. The woman was calm, but beneath the surface there was a surge of satisfaction that hadn't quite settled yet. It wasn't just the victory over Horizon Airlines that gave her peace. It was the realization that she had made a real difference. She had exposed something bigger than just a wrongful dismissal. She had forced a reckoning, one that would ripple out far beyond that airport terminal. Her phone buzzed again, pulling her from her thoughts. It was a news alert. Her eyes scanned the headline, "Airline Faces Backlash After CEO Wronged by Staff, What Happens Next?" A brief smile flickered on her lips. The story had already gone viral. The footage, the recordings, and the witnesses had sparked a fire that was already spreading across social media, through news outlets, and into boardrooms. She tapped the notification to read more. The article detailed the incident at the airport, providing an in-depth look at the power dynamics, the racial bias, and the way the woman had quietly turned the tables. It mentioned her name, though not in the context that the staff had expected. This time it wasn't a name to dismiss or ignore, it was a name to respect. The article ended with a quote from the woman herself, taken from the brief statement she had given to a reporter earlier in the day. "What happened today wasn't just about me. It's about everyone who's ever been made to feel they don't belong simply because of who they are. We all have a right to be treated with dignity regardless of what we look like, how we dress, or where we come from." She read the quote again. It was simple, direct, and exactly what she needed to say. The words resonated with her because they weren't just a statement, they were a call to action, and judging by the outpouring of support from across the country, people were listening. The phone buzzed again, this time a message from Carla. The press release is ready. We've already drafted a statement from the company and we've been contacted by several major outlets. This will be the headline for the next 48 hours. She read through the details. The press release didn't shy away from the incident. It was bold, acknowledging the mistakes made, but also offering a plan for how the company would move forward. There would be a full review of Horizon Airlines' hiring practices, customer service protocols, and diversity training. It wasn't enough for her, but it was a start. You did the right thing, Carla's message continued. People are already talking about the changes they want to see. You've given them a voice. The woman set the phone down and exhaled slowly, letting the weight of the moment settle. It wasn't over yet, but this was a turning point. The world was watching. And for the first time in a long time, she felt as though her silence, her ability to stand firm and not be swayed, had made the loudest statement possible. Carla appeared at the cabin door, holding a cup of coffee in one hand. Everything's under control, as we expected, she said, her tone professional, yet there was an undercurrent of pride in her voice. The media is on it. The legal team has everything they need, and corporate is already working with us to ensure this becomes a catalyst for real change. The woman nodded, taking the coffee and sipping it as she gazed out the window. The clouds were parting, revealing the sharp blue sky, and she could feel a shift both inside her and in the world below. She had always known that change was difficult, that it required effort and sacrifice, but she had never been one to shy away from challenges. Today had been a reminder that no matter how powerful the system, the truth always finds its way to the surface. We need to move forward, she said quietly, but we also need to make sure this moment isn't forgotten. This isn't just about fixing what happened today, it's about creating a future where these kinds of mistakes don't happen in the first place. We change the system, not just the people who fail it. Carla nodded, taking a seat beside her. Absolutely, and we'll be with you every step of the way. The plane began its descent, and the woman leaned back in her seat, her thoughts already on what lay ahead. She wasn't finished. The battle for equity, fairness, and respect was far from over, and she would continue to fight for it. But for now, there was a moment of peace, a quiet understanding that change was happening, one decision, one action, one moment at a time. As the wheels touched down on the runway, the woman knew that the journey was just beginning. The world had seen her stand tall. Now it was time to make sure the world never forgot what it felt like to be underestimated and how it felt when someone finally decided to take control. The jet landed smoothly on the tarmac, and as the woman disembarked, she felt a quiet sense of purpose settle in her chest. The noise of the press, the buzz of social media, the continuous waves of messages, everything had become a backdrop. She had seen the headlines, read the stories, and heard the reactions. But today wasn't about the media frenzy. It was about the work that lay ahead, the real work that would ensure this moment became more than just a story, but a turning point in the fight for respect and equality. She made her way through the private terminal, her steps measured and deliberate. Carla was already there, waiting with a stack of papers and her usual calm demeanor. Everything's in motion, Carla said as the woman approached. We've received requests for interviews from major outlets, and the legal team has already prepared a response to the backlash. But most importantly, we've started to hear from other companies. They're looking to learn from this and to implement similar changes. The woman nodded, appreciating the news, but knowing that this was only the beginning. It's good that they're listening, she said, but we can't just talk about change. We have to make it happen. This isn't about them seeing us as a success story. It's about changing the culture that made this incident possible in the first place. This is a systemic issue, not an isolated one. She paused, her mind working through the details of the next steps. She'd made sure that Horizon Airlines had acknowledged their failures, but that wasn't enough. Accountability needed to extend beyond the employees involved. It needed to extend to the corporate boardrooms, to the very fabric of the organizations that perpetuated inequality in the workplace. We need to set a standard, she said, turning to Carla. I want to announce a nationwide initiative, something that goes beyond just this one moment. It has to be something that affects the entire industry. I'm talking about policies on hiring, employee treatment, and discrimination, ones that can't be ignored. Not just in airlines, but in every company we partner with. Carla looked impressed. You're thinking bigger than just this one company. Exactly, she replied. We've been fighting battles on a small scale for too long. Now it's time to fight the war. If we can make these changes work here in this industry, we can move into others. We've already seen the power of collective action. We just need to harness it. They walked toward the waiting car, Carla organizing her thoughts as she spoke. I'll start drafting a proposal for the initiative. We'll need to pull in the right stakeholders, business leaders, community organizers, legal experts. We'll need to make sure it's comprehensive, but also actionable. The woman smiled, her mind already buzzing with ideas. I want this to be a partnership, not just a top-down approach. I want employees at all levels to feel like they have a voice. It's time to create real sustainable change. We've proven that it's possible. Now we make sure it lasts. As they got into the car, the woman couldn't help but feel a renewed sense of determination. She had already faced and conquered challenges that had once seemed insurmountable. But this was bigger. It wasn't just about her or her company anymore. It was about reshaping the very systems that had perpetuated injustice for far too long. And now that the door had been opened, she wasn't about to let it close. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. Media interviews, meetings with corporate leaders, and countless emails and phone calls. But amidst the chaos, the woman stayed focused on the long-term vision. She knew that change would be slow, that it would be met with resistance, but she also knew that resistance was the exact reason why the work was necessary. Her team worked tirelessly, reaching out to stakeholders from every corner of the business world, from advocacy groups to legal teams. The woman made sure that the initiative wasn't just a set of empty promises. They created tangible guidelines that companies could implement, training programs, audits, and accountability measures designed to shift the culture toward inclusion and respect. But it wasn't just about policies and procedures. It was about changing the way people thought. It was about showing that when a company like hers could take the lead, others would follow. And follow they did. Over the next few months, a ripple effect began to spread through the corporate world. Companies large and small began reaching out, eager to implement the changes that had been outlined. The initiative grew, attracting attention not only in the business world but in politics and social justice circles as well. The woman's leadership didn't just impact her own industry, it inspired a movement. She wasn't just fighting for her own success anymore. She was leading a revolution of respect, one that would be felt for generations to come. As she looked out over the city skyline from her office that evening, she knew the journey wasn't over, but it was well on its way. And she was ready to continue the fight not just for herself, but for everyone who had been made to feel like they didn't belong. As the months passed, the momentum of the initiative continued to grow. What had started as a singular confrontation had transformed into a movement, a call for change that echoed across industries. The woman, once quietly navigating the corridors of power, was now at the forefront of a revolution in corporate culture. She was no longer just a CEO. She was an advocate for fairness, a leader who had inspired others to push for change. Her office had become a hub of activity. Carla, her trusted assistant, worked tirelessly alongside her team to coordinate meetings, interviews, and policy reviews. The legal team drafted comprehensive frameworks, ensuring that every aspect of the new initiative was grounded in law, while the PR department helped craft messages that resonated with both the media and the public. The woman made it clear that this wasn't just about talking, it was about acting. The woman knew that for real change to occur, it had to be systemic. No company could claim to be truly inclusive without changing how they hired, trained, and treated their employees. No industry could claim to be ethical while allowing discrimination to fester in its ranks. She pushed the message to the front of every conversation, calling out businesses that hid behind their diversity slogans without doing the necessary work. She wasn't afraid to name names to demand action and to hold people accountable, and it was working. One by one, companies began to follow suit, implementing their own diversity and inclusion programs, revising their hiring practices, and beginning to truly listen to their employees. The ripple effect was undeniable. It spread across corporate boardrooms into factories and offices, from the smallest startups to the largest multinational corporations. Every industry from tech to retail to finance was grappling with the question, are we doing enough? But it wasn't just the businesses that were shifting, it was the people too. Employees from all levels began speaking up in ways they hadn't before. The woman's example had empowered them to take a stand, to demand better treatment, and to push for real change within their own workplaces. The stories started pouring in. Employees who had once felt silenced, now sharing their experiences, speaking out against the bias they had faced for years. It was the start of something much bigger than she had anticipated, a movement for workplace equity that spread like wildfire. One evening, the woman sat in a conference room with her team reviewing the latest reports. Carla handed her a set of documents. This just came through from HR, Carla said. It's a progress report on the companies that have adopted the initiative. We've seen a significant decrease in workplace complaints about discrimination, and the overall satisfaction among employees is up 40%. The woman smiled the numbers, confirming what she already knew. The initiative was working, but more than that, it was changing lives. The sense of fulfillment she felt wasn't just from the success of the project, it was knowing that the work they had done was making a tangible difference. People's lives were improving. They were being heard, respected, and valued. However, the work wasn't finished. There was still so much to do. She knew that real change couldn't be measured by a few successful companies or a handful of positive reports. The real test would be whether the momentum could be sustained, whether the culture could truly shift in a lasting way. A phone call came through, pulling her back from her thoughts. It was one of her industry peers, someone she had long admired. "I just wanted to personally thank you," the voice on the other end said. "What you've started here, it's not just a trend, it's a movement. I'm inspired, and my team is ready to take action. We want to be part of this change. How can we help?" The woman listened carefully, her heart swelling with pride. It wasn't just the applause from the public or the accolades from the media that mattered. It was the recognition from her peers, from other leaders, that her work was having a real impact. They were finally acknowledging that they too had a responsibility to change the system. "We've been waiting for this," the voice continued. "We've been waiting for someone to show us how to do this the right way. Let's work together." The woman didn't hesitate. "We will. Together we'll make this movement unstoppable." As she hung up, she couldn't help but feel that this was the moment. This was where it all came together, where the quiet defiance, the moments of personal struggle, and the collective action of countless others culminated in something much bigger than any one person. It was no longer just about her fight, it was about everyone who had ever been told they didn't belong. The legacy was being built before her eyes, and it was undeniable. But it wasn't over. The real work, the long-term commitment to dismantling the biases that had existed for generations, was just beginning. And with that thought, the woman sat back, looking out at the horizon. It was vast, full of potential, and hers to shape. The summit had arrived, and the atmosphere was electric. The conference room was filled with executives from some of the largest companies in the world, alongside activists, union leaders, and employees, people who had been fighting for equality in the workplace for years. There was palpable tension in the air, a mix of curiosity and skepticism. Would the powerful corporate leaders listen? Would the workers who had been silenced for so long finally be heard? The woman stood in front of the room, calm but resolute, her eyes sweeping over the diverse group before her. It was a carefully curated space, the suits of top executives sitting next to the jeans and work boots of employees who had fought to be seen, to be valued. She had brought them together with a clear purpose in mind, to break down the walls between the top and the bottom, to make the conversation about power, privilege, and respect one that everyone had a stake in. "Thank you all for being here today," the woman began, her voice strong and steady. "We've gathered in this room not just to discuss the changes we want to see, but to challenge the very systems that have allowed inequality to persist in our industries. For too long, the voices of those who make our companies run have been ignored, dismissed, or silenced. Today, we have a chance to do something different. Today, we have a chance to build something that lasts." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle in. The room was silent, all eyes on her. She could feel the anticipation, but also the discomfort. Eld Power didn't often want to give it up. "For decades, we've been told that progress is slow, that change is difficult, that it takes time," she continued. "But the truth is, the time for change is now. If we don't act, we'll only continue to perpetuate the same broken systems that have held too many people back for too long. The workers in this room, the people who make your companies run day in and day out, are not numbers. They are the heart and soul of what you do. They deserve to be heard, respected, and treated with dignity." She could see some of the executives shifting in their seats, some clearly uncomfortable with the directness of her words. But that discomfort was exactly what she wanted. She wasn't here to placate anyone. She was here to challenge them. "Today, we have an opportunity to lead," she said, her tone unwavering. "To not just promise change, but to make it happen. We can no longer afford to hide behind diversity slogans and vague statements about inclusion. We need policies that hold us accountable. Policies that prioritize the dignity of every worker from the corner office to the factory floor." The room was still save for the occasional shuffle of papers. She could sense the tension, the resistance from some corners, but she was ready. This was the moment she had been working toward for years, the moment where change could no longer be ignored or delayed. One by one, she began to call on the executives. She asked them not just to speak about their commitment to change, but to share what concrete actions they were taking. What had they done to dismantle the biases within their hiring processes? How were they ensuring that their employees, especially those from marginalized communities, had a real chance to rise within the company? And most importantly, how would they measure progress? As the executive spoke, the woman noticed something. Some were defensive, clinging to outdated ways of thinking. Others, however, seemed genuinely reflective, understanding that change was inevitable and necessary. It wasn't about whether they could afford to change. It was about whether they could afford not to. The room finally broke into a quiet buzz as the employees, many of whom had remained silent during the early part of the summit, began to speak up. The workers who had fought for years for basic recognition now found themselves in a room full of the people who held the keys to their futures. Their voices, once ignored, were now heard by the very people who had the power to make their lives better. One worker, a woman who had been with a major retail company for over 15 years, stood up. "We've been asking for these changes for years. We've been told it's too hard, too expensive, too inconvenient. But if you don't make the change now, we'll keep losing the talent, the people who make the company run. We'll keep seeing turnover, burnout, and frustration. It's not just about the bottom line, it's about making sure the people who are making you money feel respected enough to stick around." Her words were met with a ripple of applause, and the woman at the front of the room knew that this was the turning point. The workers had found their voice, and the executives were listening, truly listening for the first time. As the summit continued, the discussions became more open, more honest. There were still disagreements, still moments of tension, but they were real conversations about real issues, and that the woman knew was the first step toward lasting change. As the day came to a close, the woman stood once more at the podium, looking out at the room full of executives and workers, all engaged in discussions about the way forward. She could feel the shift in the room. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. "We're not done yet," she said, her voice resolute. "But we've taken the first step. And we're going to keep walking until this room, this world, looks different. Until every worker, every person is treated with the respect and dignity they deserve. We're all in this together." And with that, the woman knew the road ahead would be long, but it was a road they would walk together with courage, conviction, and a commitment to change that would last for generations to come.